You're doing great.
Normally, I don't know what I'm.
Excellent, you're doing fine.
All right, we started the recording. I'm going to admit everybody.
And I'm going to.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. Welcome, early birds. We're happy to have you. Oh, I forgot to put up my VSTE background this early in the morning. Oh, well. Good morning, everyone. We will get started here in just a couple minutes at the top of the hour, but if you could take a look at our Zoom session protocols before we begin. We are recording this session. Your microphones are muted, and we'll probably ask you to turn your videos off as well once you get started, just because you can be distracting. I can be distracting. I forget that I'm on video. During the session, you will have a virtual hand. The chat is available, and depending on the size of the group, we might even let you talk into your microphones. We'll see. If you promise to be well behaved, right? Let's see. There we go. All right, just a couple minutes. Please feel free to start with the chat, folks, and introduce yourself if you would like to. Tell us where you're from. Many folks here. The sun is shining here, Melissa, in out by the farm, but it is cold out there. I think it looks like it snowed last night. It's one of those mornings. And you all, I can't see what. Oh, we got just about 2 minutes to go. So again, welcome everyone. Please feel free to use the chat to introduce yourselves. And let's see, I think I saw Karen Busher come in here. Karen Busher, I'm making you a co-host if I can find you. There she is. Oop, I lost her. Did she drink? She left because I told her I was going to make her a co-host. Okay, folks are coming on in. I think the early morning hours seems to be one of the most popular times. We had lots of folks yesterday morning. Y'all are teachers, you're up at like 4 a.m., aren't you? There she is. All right, how are we doing on time here? So just about 1 minute till the top of the hour. Again, please feel free to use the chat as we work through today. We're getting up into the 40s and 50s here, so I'm not sure if we'll be playing around with microphones or not, but the chat is certainly available for you to share and also to ask questions as well. I am going to stop sharing my screen. And it is 8 a.m. Welcome, everyone. My name is Karen Richardson. I'm the Executive Director of the Virginia Society for Technology and Education. I am joined today by my co-host, or I guess you're a moderator officially, Dr. Nikki Dowd. She is on the VSTE Board of Directors. We're excited to be your host and moderator for the day. We'll be keeping an eye on the chat and doing all the things that we do. But for now, we're going to turn it over to our speaker. And I should say I'm the second string. I wasn't signed up to be the host for this. And yet fortuitously, Randall, your session was what was clicked on my schedule for this morning. So I was pretty excited. Randall Dunn is here with us today from Liberty University. And I think going to be talking about a topic that right now is even more important than ever, and also one that Dr. Dowd is involved in, and that is special education. So I am going to mute myself, and we'll probably also turn your video off, or if you haven't, you might want to go ahead and turn that off you are muted automatically, and that way we're just not distracted by people moving around, and so on and so forth. But don't be offended if we turn your video off. So, all further ado, Randall, I really am going to stop talking now. I'm going to mute everything, and we are going to turn it over to you. I'm very much looking forward to your presentation.
Thanks very much. I appreciate it. Let me know if you can't hear me. I'm wearing AirPods to try to control things and to keep slipping out. So I apologize if I start squirming around a little bit. It's good to see everybody. Okay, great. Thank you. It's good to see everybody. This is such an odd type of format, but aren't we getting used to this anyway? I mean, ever since March hit, like we're all had to function in this kind of world. And so I'm going to try to, I've got a couple things to juggle this morning as we talk through stuff. And so let me bring up my slides and we'll just kind of go from there. I'm not going to actually run the slide presentation so I can jump back and forth where I need to. But I chose this topic because actually it's kind of a personal topic for me. My world is special education at Liberty, but I also do some work in educational technology, which is why I kind of am involved in VSTE kind of presentations and that sort of thing. So let me go ahead and share my screen. Let's see. I completely forgot to do that. Okay, there we go. Please let me know if you don't see me. All right, so what we're going to try to talk about today is we're going to talk about some context of special education that kind of leads us to think in certain ways about COVID and its impact on schools and what we have to do. And so it's not, I wouldn't call it a primer on special ed, but there's elements that I want to kind of focus on that are unique to special ed. When I scanned the potential attendees, and there's 50 or 60 of you right now, there were 150 people that had shown some interest yesterday, which kind of speaks to what was just said in the introduction, that this is kind of a really important issue. But almost everybody in there was really kind of coming at it at least at their current job level from an educational technology point of view. And so instructional technology, resource teachers, that sort of thing, and tech directors, and I even saw some administrators coming in. So there's varying levels of understanding or direct knowledge of what's going on in the world of special ed. So I'm not going to spend a huge amount of time, just a few minutes. I don't have very much time, but we want to at least set the stage of what kinds of things we're going to be focusing on. We'll talk about a little bit of research just to kind of set the stage for the kinds of things that are going to connect in with special education as we think about this digital world. We'll talk about the general and the adaptive curriculum sides a little bit, because they're kind of different worlds, at least at some level. And then there's a resources bit. And so the one thing I failed to do, so I didn't follow all my instructions sent to me, and they did a good job of sending them. Way to go, VSTE. But I didn't start up a Discord. So right after this, I'll jump in and create a Discord room for this. So if anybody wants to continue on the chat, just look for that a little bit later on. I also have a resource that I'm going to give you that's kind of a Google hosted one. And so you'll be able to use that. In fact, that's the tiny URL at the bottom. So I'm showing the end at the beginning, but that's what this is here. And I've given everybody who has access to it editing privileges. And so you feel free to rip it to shreds if you wish, but it'd be nice to keep at least some semblance of order in there. I've added some things in to start the conversation, but feel free to share this with whoever. I don't think this is the end all on this kind of stuff, but I think at least it's another set of resources that might be useful. What I really find is most useful about doing VSTE presentations is that the folks in the room often bring a lot more to the table than I ever thought of myself. And so I encourage you to share your knowledge and your direct information and what you've been doing in your own schools here. I would have preferred this session to be much more discussion oriented, but it's in this format, it's gonna be a little bit harder to have that. I'm pretty relational, and if I can't really see your faces and your reactions, it makes it hard for me. But anyway, so this is the direction we're going. Since I can't see you leave, if at this moment you're like, well, this is not exactly what I expected, I'm not going to be offended if I actually see you disappear, but feel free to jump in with text or anywhere if you have some personal things to connect here. All right, so the context for this, the presentation itself, this is pretty limited. The discussion is limited, which I've already mentioned, but the other piece is really difficult. I think I was a little ambitious with kind of doing this, so I had to keep this kind of surface leveling as a result of it, but at least we need to be thinking about it. The problem is that there are 13 categories of disability often accepted. Autism itself is one of those things that has so many different variances within it. Intellectual disabilities, it just depends. Multiple disabilities makes it complicated, and learning disabilities there's lots of different ways that people can be receptively or expressively or processing oriented disability wise in the world of learning disability. So you have a lot of different types of things going on. So to be able to put this and say, here are the tools to use, it makes it complicated, but we're still trying to keep it from a high level. But just understand we can't get down into the dirty deeds on these kinds of things. We have to kind of focus at it from a kind of a conceptual point of view. My background was in special education. I have a master's in it. My doctorate's more in the learning tech side. I've been tapped to manage the special ed graduate program at Liberty. But the other part and I was a general education teacher also. I taught social studies, language arts, art, and theater is what I did early on. Most of my work was, and the classroom was in the 90s. I went to the software industry for 5 years, and then for the last 15 years, I've been teaching in higher education. But I'm also a parent of a child with special needs. Has dyslexia, but he's got good coping skills on that. But he was identified late. But he also has attention deficit, and so he is being served in a general curriculum context. So when the world fell apart, more or less in March, the governor stopped the face-to-face classes in March. That was one of the first thoughts in my mind was really not about special education broadly or professionally. It was how in the world is my son going to survive in this era? And so I look at it from a parent's point of view almost first nowadays, and then I go from there. He's in 10th grade. So from this is your primer right here. That little 4 lines right there. But in a nutshell, special education is kind of split into 2 broad categories here in Virginia. And that's not to say that there aren't other licensures outside of this. It's just that the broad categories cover the main areas of what we do in schools. And we do have the deaf population, hearing impaired, visual impaired, and so forth. And they kind of still are being kind of addressed in those kind of broad ways of thinking. So we have general curriculum, the 504, and 504 is Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act. And both of those are assuming that the children being served, this is just to set the stage, or I'm not going that long in this, but the general curriculum of 504 assumes that the children being served are, it's not even just assumed, it's part of the specified services, are accessing the general curriculum, they're accessing the standards of learning, and they're working on generally level with assistance and support. And that's really the way we set that up. So the general curriculum approach is often inclusion oriented. There's sometimes co-teaching environments. You probably see this in your own schools. And you know who these kids are. And I'm sure as technology resource teachers, you're going in and out of these classrooms all the time. And maybe we're even working directly with these kids. But they often blend a little bit into the environments in which they are with their peers, their general education peers. So the considerations there are usually processing, organizational, and those sorts of things that are the challenges that children face. So they are on top of the standard stuff that children face in schools. And so that's why we need to be thinking about that semi-uniquely as we think about COVID and the impact. The other side is the adapted side, and adapted are kind of what we call low incidence populations. And so they're usually moderate, sometimes mild intellectual disabilities, but moderate to severe disabilities. Sometimes those kids, well, often those kids are not on the standards of learning. In fact, they aren't. They are working on either line standards, they're within the applied program, and they are not working in biology 9th grade, chemistry 10th grade, or sciences 10th grade, or government 12th grade classes. They're working on life skills and things like that in order to prepare themselves for at least some levels of independence. We're going to go over that in just a little bit more detail, but in the context of thinking about technologies applied. The other 2 things to kind of mention that are unique, and when we talk about general curriculum versus adaptive curriculum, the implication there is that we have to worry about accommodations, but accommodations have to do with the learning environment itself. And so suddenly in the world of digital, how are we going to deal with this? Well, the accommodations may be slightly different than extended time on a test in a classroom or a different testing environment. These kinds of things are the ways that we have to think about it. So required services, though, when my son was receiving services before March of 2020, he had somebody who was coming into his English and his math class to check on him, make sure he was organized at the beginning of class. He had a resource class with a special education teacher every single day for 50 minutes. And he went and go solve this gentleman, who I'll talk about a little bit later. And that gentleman worked with him on his general schoolwork and also helped him with organizational skills and study skills. And those are the kinds of things that my son received. But there are other things that there obviously can be done as well. So The required services are listed right in a legally binding document that many of you know about, which is the IEP. And the IEP meetings are also being transformed as well. And this is a pretty significant question that we have to deal with. And I'm sure, and feel free to jump in with comments on this, but I'm sure all of us are seeing this happen right now in schools because they're having to change IEPs on the fly. They had to do that in March. They may still be doing that even today based upon the success of our students in these kind of online, semi-online environments. And so this is another thing we have to worry about. The last thing is when we talk about technology and special education, we almost always in the special ed world think of assistive tech. And that's the way we usually think of it. And assistive technology, and we'll go over this in a second, but assistive technology is really applied to how students access learning and need something to get them there. That's really what assistive tech does. And so it's as simple as large grip pencils to much more complex systems like text-to-speech, augmented communication boards, things like that. And so like digital boards. So those kinds of things are what assistive technology does. It's different, obviously, than educational technology. And educational technology, as all of you are 100% available or understand, is that it's all about how we enhance learning experiences and for the general classroom environment in order to help our students learn. And so while the end game is helping the students be successful in a classroom, the approach is quite different. We are focusing on the ed tech side. We're not talking about assistive tech other than just ed. All right, so these are the two broad principles that we're kind of using to guide this discussion. This is very brief. The first principle is the one that's special education oriented, which is it's all about access to learning. It's actually a civil rights issue. I'm not going to go into a lecture there. These are things I talk about in higher ed all the time, but just a very simple statement. Special education is based off of Brown versus Board of Education. So it's really about equal access to learning and not being separated from peers as much as possible. And so this is a guiding principle for us thinking about digital application of special education. If we're going online with special ed, we have to keep that in mind, that it is about helping the students to access the learning environment. I have to speed up, I just noticed the time. I apologize, folks. But the one on the bullet below is what we, the world of ed tech, always think about, which is technology doesn't make you better. Technology makes a good teacher better. But the pedagogy is really important. And so we are going to be, when we talk about these kind of categories or the types of things that students with special needs need to have support in doing, this is where we go. We're not looking for a simple tech solution for blank problem, whatever it might be. What we're looking for is what is the best pedagogical approach for dealing with this problem and how can I translate this into a digital world? And so that's the way we approach this. So in the back of my mind, as I was thinking about this presentation, I'm thinking that maybe this is just another way that we can start thinking about a different population, because when COVID happened, we all ran around like chickens with their head cuts off and tried to figure, which has happened in higher ed too, try to figure out how to make this thing work. And it was extremely, extremely difficult. But we were doing it for the largest group of population we possibly can. Now, we also need to try to figure out how we can support some of these others in the world of special education. Another piece to kind of consider, and I'll be quicker because I'm yapping too much, the emerging role of the parent. In special ed, this is especially difficult, and I'm going to highlight it. These two right here are really, really important. So before COVID, I as a parent was engaged with the learner, my kid. I was collaborating with the teacher. I was going back and forth. Now I still collaborate with the teacher, actually more frequently. I direct more in-day activities. I have to force my kid to get out of bed. He's a teenager. So get out of bed, start doing your work, that sort of thing. It's not like he has to be at school at a certain time. He goes to school twice, 2 days a week. The other 3 days, I'm finding myself doing that. But also these two here, progress monitoring, and sometimes I'm the educator. And that's because the relationship has changed in special education so that there's a bit of a push out in some cases to more of that work being done at home. I know that's still being done in general education too, but we need to remember that in special ed because there are unique things happening there. And also while we are all working at the house as well. The online IEP, I'm just going to very quickly go here, but there's an online IEP system, just be aware that exists. One of the challenges we're facing is how do we do online IEP meetings and things like that. So privacy and FERPA come into effect because these things are legally binding and there are specific 25-page documents that are protecting the privacy of parents and children with special needs. And so these kinds of things need to be considered pretty heavily. And so how are our systems doing that? Now, I think probably by and large, the schools have done a probably good job in trying to identify solutions that do not violate FERPA and probably can be used pretty easily for the unique needs of special needs and IEPs, but that's something else we need to deal with. I think it's an interesting question, and there's at least one special educator in here. We may want to start wondering, are we going to be doing IEP meetings after COVID is over through digital means? It may not be a bad thing to do, considering some of the limitations some parents have in being able to attend. Some community challenges, and there's reopening issues, and it's the thing that we're all kind of talking about. We cannot, according to law, we cannot prioritize reopening based on race and gender and things like that. That's, I mean, at least the directives of the governor. But we can on the access needs of exceptional learners. So you actually are seeing special ed kids come into schools even as many as 5 days a week, even in the age of COVID, but taking a lot of precautions because they recognize that it may not be successful in the digital environment. But we have to also recognize that, and I'm an example of this out next to this mountain here in Virginia, is that there's issues of connectivity. There's the governor's push for rural access. There's a bunch of stuff coming in there, but we still have folks who are working on essentially what is called dial-up instead of high speed. And for me, I have about a meg and a half of download speed out here. So Netflix is difficult. And so that's videoing right now is done by hotspot. And I don't have to tell you, we're in the hybrid in-class or online only world. And so these are the kinds of things that kind of feed into our consideration about how we deal with this. So what does the research say? Well, there are three things that kind of pertain to this discussion. The first one is UDL. So Universal Design Learning, I don't have to explain this to you people. You guys know this stuff, so I'm not going there. But we want to say UDL, especially as applied for general curriculum, as our students are participating in their classes with their teachers, and they're trying to survive in a biology class, but they have a processing issue, or they have a focus issue, or they have an organizational issue. How do we help them? Well, possibly one way is to think about how we can design this classroom in an online environment in order to meet all the needs as much as we possibly can from that UDL perspective. How can I engage as many students as I can in this environment? The second is the parents and collaboration. I've already mentioned this. I am being engaged on like a 3 times a day process by his primary caseworker, special educator at the high school. And so that collaboration is extremely important. I have a partnership with the teacher at school more than I ever did last year. And it's a constant state. So, but that's proven over and over again in the research is that the more that parents collaborate with teachers, the more likely the kid is to be successful. It couldn't be more true in the online world, which is what we're talking about here. And the third, online learning is more equitable for higher performing students. If you find, and when I say equitable, I mean that there's a higher likelihood of success in both environments of online versus face-to-face with students who are higher functioning, as opposed to average students, slow students, and students in exceptional learning. Those students tend to struggle more. So we need to keep that in mind. All right. Going fast. All right, so the general curriculum world. So we're talking about this. Now, general curriculum is, the way we think about general curriculum is we think of it as this is a general class with differentiation needs within the class itself. So the design of general education formats in an online format has a definite impact on what might be considered success for exceptional learners. And this is where we start thinking about multimedia. High text is usually a poor choice in these environments. And so as the tech resource teacher is that incredible resource and exceptional expert in the field, you're helping those teachers try to figure this world out. One thing they can be thinking about is how much text and how much is being absorbed in there. Most students, especially in the world of learning disabilities with processing issues related to especially reading and verbal content, are going to struggle majorly in some of these high ones. It is an overwhelming experience for some students to look at what is on a screen. In our world, it's in Canvas in Bedford County schools, but in other school systems, you may be using something else for learning management, and that's problematic. So we consider multimedia design, and we have to think about cognitive load. And I think everybody here probably has been exposed to that to some level, but the basic statement is you only have so many marbles to allocate any task. You have 100 marbles total. if you start working on verbal tasks, you give up 60 of those, you don't have another set of 60 for another verbal task. So anything that requires verbal processing is going to require that the student have to be able to focus on one thing as opposed to multiple things. So sequential and organized and step by step are really important. Less overwhelming tasks. Frequent checkpoints become extremely important, especially again with students who are organized or have difficulty with organization. And the peer collaborative work is another great way to do it, where you have the student who's exceptional in one particular skill peering up with somebody who is not. I'm seeing that a lot with I have a student, my daughter is in advanced classes. My son is a struggler and my daughter is gifted. And so there's, I've seen both sides, and both sides I'm seeing the same thing, which is that they're being asked to work with other students in this environment, which has challenges unto itself. And I'm sure you have lots of stories about that, but that's something else to be to consider there. Trying to speed up a little bit. So here are some things. These are kind of broad categories. You know the tools. I'm not going to, I know everybody here knows what Flipgrid and Edpuzzle is, so I don't have to demonstrate any of this stuff to you. You guys are experts on this. You probably know a lot more tools than I do. So I just speak in the world of conceptual and the kind of, that kind of thing. So first thing is, we have to consider the kinds of class and content management systems that are out there. And we're not saying content management, I'm talking about Seesaw, but you could also use just about anything in there for organizing content, as simple as even Google Sites and things. But how are things being designed and controlled and managed, and what kind of systems are best for keeping students on task and being able to keep them along on a path? The second one is interactive content management, and those are things like Pear Deck and Nearpod. I actually interviewed a teacher for this presentation, and I'll spend a few minutes on her stuff in a second. But she uses Pear Deck for morning meetings every single morning with her students who are in the adapted realm. They are students who are strugglers. And so, and they are not working in standard classes. They're working in life skills and daily living classes and things like that. And they're working on basic academic skills. So she uses Pear Deck for that particular task. I'll show you an example of that. Assessment tools, you guys know these, but anything that allows the student to communicate quickly so that you can give them quick feedback and then keep them on task. The more time that lags between assessments, the more likely a student who struggles in the classroom is going to have a hard time in the classroom even further. Multimedia integration, this stuff is pretty straightforward. You know this stuff. Captioning and text-to-speech is something you may not consider very much, but the more that the videos actually have, or any kind of video content or multimedia content actually has the captioning and text-to-speech for, or not text-to-speech, but speech-to-text, I should have written speech-to-text, sorry, will allow the students to have easier access, because they can always go back and it gives them another verbal input that's complementary and does not violate cognitive load. And then general reading comprehension, you have things like reading theory, but that's just one example. There's lots out there, and I know that many of you have a lot more than I do. In the adapted and the general curriculum consideration, the morning Zoom meetings have become a really important connection point. These students need a frequent connecting point, especially in the adapted world, because the relationship is really important with their teacher. They almost become a second parent to them. And so this disruption that they had that happened in March really pulled out an extremely important support for those kids at home. And so the morning, I hear adapted folks using the morning meetings primarily. And so they're trying to use video-based things, video-based conferencing in order to do that. But the other thing is, I've heard in the general curriculum world, I was talking to a teacher, he talked about the use of waiting rooms. And the waiting rooms, he will have 5 kids in a room, and he will bring one in, work with them one-on-one for about 5 minutes, help them get started on a task, send them back out to the waiting room. Another student comes in, he'll work with them one-on-one on a task, send them back out to the waiting room, bring the first kid back, check to see how he's doing, send them back to the waiting room. And so it becomes this kind of like almost like a virtual office hours that's in a constant flux that is happening. We need to keep issues of privacy in mind always. And relationship to teacher, class, and content, that's based out of research. We know that all 3 of those things are important. It is, and this is where we help our general education friends. It is not about designing something where you just dump your notes. That's a content piece only. You still have to maintain the relationship to class and teacher. That's true for our special needs as well. I'm trying to zip quick because I've got 5 minutes. Adapted curriculum. We already talked about the morning meetings. That's one thing. The tracking of performance behavior is really important. Since I'm running out of time, let me jump over and show you an example of that. It's here. This is using Google Form And she made a copy for me. This is an adapted teacher locally, and she sent this to me. But these are the sections, and you can see the kinds of things that are being worked on. The relationship has shifted so that the teacher is actually almost a consultant for the parent working with the kid on these particular tasks. And this is where it's had to shift, because these are, if you look at this list, cleaning, cooking, communication needs home address, and those types of knowing home address. So the student A identified her shoulders, her arms, her back, her forehead. You can do that on video if you want, but you can also get the parent to get there to do that every single day. And this is working on an IEP goal or task. And so you can kind of see this. I would share this with you, but I don't have permission to do that. If I get permission later, I can try to figure out a way to post that somewhere. But tracking your performance behavior using something like Google Forms is the easiest way because it's so crazy flexible, but there are other forming systems out there. Simple digital portfolios to collect the kinds of things the students know, especially in an adaptive world. We're talking about lower functioning, so knowing the day of the week, knowing even collection of what their body parts are. Here's my hand, put that in the portfolio. Take a picture of my ear, put that in the portfolio. Social stories are ways that we focus on how to do something socially in life. And so it's how you make a new friend, how do you greet somebody you don't know, how do you talk to a boss. These are the kinds of things that could be in there, and they go along with something else called task analysis, where it's broken down not only in a overall statement about how things are done, but it's the step-by-step what is being done. And so the world of task analysis and the world of digital in this online world, the task analysis will need to be something that is not demonstrated in the classroom, but somehow provided in some sort of media format. And so we have some options in there. And the constant communication with parents where we're moving into a consultative role. The post-secondary transition, I'm so out of time, so I'm just going to briefly say that you can see that these 4 pieces are what post-secondary transition focuses on, which is high school, moving kids towards daily living and community living and that sort of thing. The challenge here is that we want students to have existence in real life activities doing these types of things. So we need to be focusing on observational and performance oriented types of technologies. How can I collect information on how well the student's doing? I refer you back to the form that was used before, especially for the daily living, the community living, and possibly the vocational activities if the student is doing something that is kind of vocationally minded, skills oriented for that. Go ahead. I heard somebody.
I was just going to say, we do have a quick couple questions here that I thought maybe we could address.
Let's do it.
Because we are running up the end of the time. Great. So Diana first asked, you were talking about breakout rooms earlier, we think, when you were talking about them moving in and out. Good. Yes. So let's see. Are Google Forms privacy safe?
They are in Bedford County, the way that they have them implemented. As I understand it, Bedford County has no concerns about the privacy. And I know other systems use it, and I use it at Liberty University with my students, and there's no concern there. So I haven't seen any concerns raised.
Yeah, Ellen Nozel in the room. Sorry, Ellen, I know who you are. So she said, if it's a school-based account, I think that's the important piece there. Use your domain specific. Exactly right. Google. Yeah. Don't just go out to regular old Gmail.
That's right.
Suzanne from Virginia Beach asks, if a parent indicating that their student has achieved certain skills, can that be considered official documentation?
Well,
so that form that the mom's filling out.
Yeah, and that's a fair question. I don't know if this is going to be challenged. I think the problem is we need to do it this way to some extent. Maybe what ends up happening is something official comes along with what that teacher is doing in the Google Forms. If it's collecting information and it's saying that the student has done this, there probably needs to be an official assessment at one point to show that everything has been completely done. What I was showing was really kind of the steps to get there. It's the daily practice, it's the collecting data, it's the progress monitoring as the student goes towards it. So I would imagine, this is something we haven't had to deal with before, but I would imagine the statement will be that you need to have an official school check on that. And we generally don't care that much I should say, we care a lot more about things like alternative assessment programs where we're trying to prove things through affidavit. I don't think we're going to have to get to the affidavit level, but I think that's something we're going to have to wrestle with. We may need more guidance from the state on how special education goals and objectives can be met by using parents as almost like a resource. That's a good question.
That's great. And that's all the questions. So I'm going to say, if folks want to stick around for another minute or two, we'll let Randall finish up here. I've got the recording going. Otherwise, you could go off and start your days and we'll be back. So go ahead, Randall, and finish up. I just wanted to get those questions in before the end.
That's okay. I basically mostly, I mean, the only other thing to show is another example of the, this is the Pear Deck, and this is what the morning meetings look like. So, she runs it, and the students have, I have pictures here. They actually have a copy at home, and they communicate by video by showing as they follow along with what she's doing on the Pear Deck or through just the PowerPoint in some cases. And so she's trying to do what she can to try to engage the students, but it's been a bit of a challenge for her. So anyway, so I just wanted to finish with that. I do appreciate everybody showing up. Please contact me if you want to continue the conversation. This is a kind of an evolving question, and we don't really know the answers well. But thanks very much.
I'm sorry, Dr. Dunn, we have one more question. Can you, the Discord link, someone asked about the Discord link?
I'll add that right after this. I don't have the Discord link, so maybe what I'll do is I'll put it in the description or something.
In general, folks, you can head to Discord. After this, we're in room Crystal B. So what we did was set up Discord chats for each room. So if you do want to go out directly after here and talk about it, there is a Crystal B chat room, but you're of course welcome to create a special education channel or however that might work as well.
I'll do that.
So, and the recording, Suzanne, we're working on the recordings and we'll get them posted after, you know, probably post-conference, but I know my little team of elves is behind the scenes, busy downloading and doing all that good stuff. So, Randall, thank you very much. This has been terrific. Thanks for everyone for attending. We'll be back at noontime with another group of sessions, but for now, I'm going to stop the recording, and please have a great day, everyone.